The ultimate irony of their fate was not that they were outnumbered 3-1, nor that they stood on a foreign riverbank, thousands of miles from the familiar scent of French soil, but that 7,000 of the most hardened, disciplined warriors the West could muster were about to be utterly destroyed, not by the enemy's superior skill, but by the sheer, unbridled confidence of their own Crusader allies. They wore the cross of sacrifice, yet they were marching to be sacrificed on the altar of European hubris. Sir Kaelan de Versailles, master of the surviving Templar contingent, pressed his mailed hand against the granite battlement of the old broken tower. Below him, the tents of the Ottoman army seemed to stretch into infinity, a sea of white canvas punctuated by the cold black spears of the Sultan's regiments. It was a terrifying, magnificent sight. Kaelan's Templars, 7,000 men pulled from the hidden commanderies of Cyprus, Rhodes, and the Iberian Peninsula, were the tip of the spear of the grandest Western army assembled in a century. Yet they were a disciplined wedge of iron in a brittle body of glass. He had argued, pleaded, and nearly come to blows with the French commanders, the fiery John of Nevers, the young, arrogant heir to Burgundy, and the headstrong Marshal Boucicaut. Their strategy was simple. Charge. The Knights of France believed their heavy cavalry was an irresistible force that could smash through any eastern defense. Kaelan knew differently. He had fought the Saracens in the Levant. He knew the subtle, grinding patience of the eastern battlefield. The current Sultan, Bayezid I, the Thunderbolt, was a true inheritor of that tradition. And this gathering was not a simple army. It was a sophisticated, baited trap. They believe we have caught them on the march, Brother Kaelan. The voice of Brother Rhys, Kaelan's sergeant-at-arms, cut through the night air. Rhys, a Welshman whose broad shoulders strained his chainmail, was as grim and practical as Kaelan was visionary. They speak of chasing them down, of scattering the Turks like sparrows before the eagle. Kaelan did not turn. Then they are fools, Rhys. Look closer at the encampment. Do you see the disorganized chaos in a retreating or cornered force? No, they are arrayed in perfect layered ranks. Those are not common akinji on the perimeter. Those are the Sipahi, their provincial heavy cavalry, and they are fresh. Behind them, look at the fires. See how they are centrally clustered, low to the ground? That is the Janissary Corps, the Sultan's slaves, the men who know no fear and fight only for their master. They are the anvil. We, the Crusaders, are the hammer. He paused, the cold air stinging his exposed face. But Bayezid does not intend to be the head of the nail. He intends to crush the hammer against the anvil until only dust remains. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of Kaelan's premonition. The Templars, though officially suppressed almost a century before, had survived. They were the Ordo Vindex, the Order of the Avenger, a clandestine society whose true mission had long ago transcended mere landholding in the Holy Land. Their primary secret oath was to protect a single sacred relic, an ancient Byzantine casket known only as the Ark of St. George, a piece of holy history whose existence was known only to the master and a handful of senior men. The Ark had been smuggled out of Constantinople and now, incredibly, rested in a heavily guarded supply wagon hidden in the heart of the Christian camp, near the Hungarian king Sigmund's personal standard. The current crusade was meant to be the glorious return, the final undeniable proof that the Templars' long penance was over. Kaelan, however, feared it would be their final, complete undoing. The French will charge at dawn, Rhys stated, accepting the inevitable. They will smash into the Sipahis, and then the Janissaries will consume them. What then, master? Do we follow the doomed banner, or do we hold to the final oath? Kaelan finally turned, the moonlight catching the austere carved cross on his breastplate. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, were haunted by the memory of the Grand Master's final cryptic instruction delivered on the docks of Rhodes. Protect the Ark of St. George, whatever the cost of the field. That was the sole order. Victory was secondary. The preservation of the sacred line was paramount. "We follow them, Rhys," Kaelan said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "But we do not charge for glory. We charge for position. We are the last wedge. When the French break, and they will break, we will be the wall they shatter against. Our mission is to buy time for the King of Hungary to retreat, and for the Ark to be taken from the field, away from the Sultan's grasping hand. He walked down the winding stone stairs, his boots echoing in the oppressive silence. He passed the ranks of his men, each Templar knight and sergeant-at-arms standing motionless, their faces obscured by steel helms. They were the best-trained fighting force in Europe, masters of the combined arms charge, their horses protected by specialized mail barding, their discipline unbending. They fought not with the reckless abandon of the French nobility, but with the cold, absolute focus of men who believed they were doing God's sacred final work. 7,000 men, each a perfect killing machine, but a drop of water in the Ottoman Ocean. In the pre-dawn gloom, as the first faint orange light began to streak the horizon over the distant Balkan mountains, the trumpets of the French nobility blared, not the measured call to arms, but a reckless, triumphant fanfare. They were gathering their horses, polishing their gilded helms, their voices loud with arrogant cheers. They had no fear, which made them lethal to themselves. Kaelan mounted his war-horse, Malakt, Calamity, a magnificent black stallion bred for the shock of the charge. The banner of the Ordo Vindex, a black cross on a field of blood red, replacing the traditional white, was unfurled by the standard-bearer. Rhys, Kaelan commanded, his hand gripping the pommel of his heavy two-handed sword. Stay focused on the center. If we cannot win the day, we will make sure our final stand echoes through history. It is better to die in purpose than to live in a gilded prison. Rhys nodded, his massive form a shadow in the morning haze. Under the black cross, master, we shall meet them as one, and break as 1,000 pieces of granite. Kaelan took one last breath of the cold air, smelling the distant smoke of the Ottoman camp, and turned his gaze toward the gathering of his arrogant allies. The French would charge first. They would be annihilated. Then the 7,000 Templars, the last purest hope of a dying order, would ride into the teeth of the Sultan's trap, not for victory, but for the sacred secret duty that bound them beyond the grave. The scythe of Anatolia was about to fall, and the Templars were standing right where the blade would strike. The air inside the fortress of Vidin was thick with the smells of stale wine, unwashed wool, and the nervous tension of thousands of foreign soldiers crammed into ancient stone corridors. Vidin, recently captured by the Crusade, was a temporary seat of power, a crumbling Byzantine relic on the Danube, now teeming with the loud, boisterous energy of the French knights. It was here, in a vaulted, echoing chamber once used by Bulgarian Tsars, that Sir Kaelan clashed violently with Marshal Boucicaut. The room was illuminated by sputtering tallow candles, casting long, dramatic shadows that seemed to dance with the rage in Boucicaut's eyes. The marshal, a man of dangerous courage and boundless confidence, was flanked by the nervous Hungarian lords who knew the Ottoman threat firsthand. Kaelan stood alone, his Templar contingent waiting silently outside, the black and red banner a grim contrast to the royal blue of the French House of Valois. "You speak of traps, Sir Knight," Boucicaut spat, his gauntleted hand slamming onto a map table carved with the river's winding path. "You speak of caution and discipline. Such words are fit for merchants and monks, not for the anointed chivalry of France. We are here to meet the infidel, not to play a waiting game behind walls built by cowards." Kaelan's voice remained low, measured, and infinitely more dangerous than the Frenchman's bellow. "I speak of winning, Marshal, not merely dying gloriously. We bypassed the siege of Nicopolis against King Sigismund's counsel to face Sultan Bayezid's army head-on. That decision was fueled by French pride. Now, as we approach the field, you propose to ignore every principle of strategy and smash blindly into a terrain you have not even scouted. He gestured toward the map, his finger tracing a line behind the assumed Ottoman vanguard position. My scouts, men who know these woods and ridges, have confirmed what every veteran of the East knows. Bayezid does not fight fair. He does not offer a flat field for your celebrated charge. He will use the very earth against us. There are ravines, hidden trenches, and palisades designed to break the momentum of your heavy cavalry. He wants you to charge, Marshal. It is his primary desire. The Hungarian commander, Lord Istvan, stepped forward, his face pale with worry. The Templar speaks truth, Marshal. My men know the Sultan's tactics. He is a master of the feigned retreat, of using light horse archers to draw the heavy infantry forward until they are exhausted, then unleashing the Janissaries. Boucicault laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. Janissaries, slaves in petticoats. They are cannon fodder. Our lances will skewer them by the hundreds. This is the new Grand Crusade, Istvan. We cannot waste weeks sitting before Nicopolis while the Sultan is allowed to march his entire empire to meet us. We must crush his advance guard and take the initiative, proving the superiority of the Christian knight. And what if that advance guard is merely the bait? Kaelan countered, leaning forward, his gaze locking with the marshals. I have fresh intelligence. Bayezid has used the siege of Nicopolis to cover the deployment of his finest regiments. He has 20,000 soldiers, not the disorganized rabble your captured spy claims. Furthermore, he is keeping his most dangerous weapon, the Janissary foot archers and the elite Kapikulu cavalry, fresh and hidden behind the main lines. They are not meant to fight the initial battle. They are the executioners, meant to clean up the wreckage of your charge. Kaelan pulled a rolled parchment from his belt, a rough drawing sketched by his scouts. It depicted the Ottoman battle array, a thin, enticing line of Sipahis and Azabs, irregulars at the front, designed to appear weak, a hidden layer of trenches and pointed stakes behind them. And far in the rear, 2 terrifying blocks of disciplined men, the Janissaries. He is setting an enormous, layered trap, Kaelan insisted. The French charge, full of elan and speed, will break upon the trenches. They will fall into disarray. The Ottoman light cavalry will swarm them, and the Janissaries will advance, fresh, disciplined, and irresistible, carving through the exhausted, scattered remnants of the finest chivalry in Europe. Our 7,000 Templars, positioned on the flank, will be forced to follow your disastrous example, or stand aside and watch the crusade crumble. A French baron, his face red with indignation, pounded his fist on the table. This is treasonous speech. You doubt the strength of the Holy Cross? I doubt the strength of arrogant flesh, Kaelan roared, finally losing his cool. The volume of his voice momentarily silenced the room. God favors the righteous, but the devil favors the tactically sound. We must slow our advance, properly scout the ridges, and fight the Sultan where his deployment is weakest, not where his trap is best laid. King Sigismund agrees with me. He advocates for delaying, using the Hungarian light forces to harass and test the lines. Boucicault looked at Kaelan with utter disdain, his eyes glittering with a fatal self-belief. The King of Hungary is a cautious politician, Sir Kaelan. We are crusaders. We do not delay. We do not harass. We crush. Your Templars, for all your whispered secrets and disciplined marching, have lost your fire. You have become too much like the Eastern men you fight, sneaky and subtle. We shall rely on brute strength and the will of God, not on the whispers of your shadowy order. The marshal snatched the parchment from the table, crumpling the rough drawing of the Ottoman deployment. At dawn we move. The French lead the charge. The Hungarians will secure the center. Your Templars, Sir Kaelan, will anchor the left flank and support the main force. You will follow the king's son, John of Nevers. You will obey. The argument was lost. Kaelan felt the cold dread settle deeper into his bones. The pride of the French, nurtured by decades of courtly romance and tournaments, was now a tangible weight dragging the entire army towards disaster. He bowed stiffly, his mind already shifting from strategy to survival. "As you command, Marshal," Kaelan stated, his voice now dangerously flat. "But if the French charge breaks, our contingent will not be sacrificed to your folly. We will follow the final, highest oath of the Ordo Vindex." He turned and strode out, leaving the hot-headed marshal to his certain doom. The final oath. It echoed in his mind. Protect the Ark of St. George, whatever the cost of the field. The time for strategy was over. The time of the last stand was drawing near. The year was 1376. Roads smelled of salt, sun-baked limestone, and the distant, ever-present scent of gunpowder lingering from the skirmishes along the Anatolian coast. Kaelan was 20 years old, lean and fiercely devout, serving as a newly elevated sergeant-at-arms in the Knights Hospitalier. He believed his life was mapped out, fighting the Turks, protecting pilgrims, and dying honorably under the white cross of St. John. His world shattered on a blustery evening when he was summoned, not to the Grand Master of the Hospitaliers, but to a secluded, windless chamber beneath the old Tower of the Winds. Waiting for him was an ancient man, cloaked entirely in black wool that swallowed the candlelight, his face a map of old scars and profound weariness. This man, whose identity was a secret even from the majority of the Hospitalier chapter, was the true, hidden Grand Master of the Ordo Vindex, the Avenging Order, the clandestine continuation of the Knights Templar. "Sit, Brother Kaelan," the old master commanded, his voice deep and dry as parchment. "You believe you serve St. John. You believe your fight is for the King of Heaven. Those beliefs are good, simple anchors for a good soldier. But there is a greater truth, a heavier crown, and a far more dangerous oath." Kaelan, bewildered, knelt. The room held only two objects of note, a plain black iron crucifix and a small wooden casket, roughly the size of a king's head, resting on a stone pedestal. It was bound in tarnished silver and sealed with 3 interlocking, unfamiliar sigils. The master began to speak of the true history of the Templars, not the bankers and landholders executed by Philip IV, but the shadowy inner circle who had escaped the purge. They had carried with them an unspeakably valuable collection of relics and artifacts, stolen, acquired, or recovered from the Holy Land over 2 centuries. The Order's purpose had shifted from conquest to preservation. They were the eternal guardians. "Our death warrant was issued a century ago," the master explained, his eyes fixed on the casket. "But our mission was not concluded. The greatest treasure we possess is this, the Ark of St. George. It contains not the bones of a saint, but the proof of a lineage, a secret that binds the fate of the true church with the fate of the Byzantine Empire." He paused, letting the weight of the impossible secret settle on Kaelan. "We are the Vindex. Our duty is to keep this ark safe, to ensure that it never falls into the hands of the Ottoman Sultanate, for its possession would give them the religious and political legitimacy to claim Constantinople itself. We have fought this secret war for decades, maneuvering within the courts of Europe and the fractured principalities of the East." The master then revealed the terrifying reality of their situation in 1396. The French, seeking glory and redemption, were rushing headlong towards an inevitable confrontation that the Order had sought to avoid for years. The crusade was not a strategic endeavor. It was a desperate political gamble by European monarchs seeking favor with the papacy and glory for themselves. "We received the final communiqué from Rome 3 days ago," the master stated, his hand resting on the smooth, cold wood of the casket. "The message is simple, Kaelan. The crusade is doomed. The arrogance of Nevers and Boucicaut will deliver the finest chivalry of Europe into the Sultan's maw. The only thing that matters is the Ark." He looked Kaelan directly in the eye, the weight of a century of secrecy in his gaze. "The Ark must be taken from the field if the battle is lost. It must survive. Your Templars are the only disciplined, unified force capable of executing the maneuver under the kind of catastrophic collapse I foresee. I charge you, Sir Kaelan, as master of the field contingent, with the final, most terrible task of the Ordo Vindex." Kaelan's heart hammered against his ribs. The simple, noble duty of fighting pirates and defending walls seemed impossibly far away. This was high treason, religious heresy, and the weight of 100 lost empires all resting on his shoulders. "I will carry out the Order's will, Grand Master," Kaelan finally managed, his voice thick with the solemnity of the oath. "But the entire contingent? 7,000 men given up for a single relic? It is a heavy price." "The price of a crown is always heavy, brother," the master replied, a ghost of a sad smile touching his lips. "These 7,000 men joined the Vindex not for land or coin, but for the sacred purpose. Their lives are worth less than the safety of this box. The survival of the Order lies in the preservation of the secret, and the survival of the secret lies in the safety of the Ark. Do not look upon the faces of your men when the time comes. Look only at the seal. Protect the Ark of St. George, whatever the cost of the field." The master then rose, his shadow engulfing the young knight. He placed a hand on Kaelan's shoulder, imparting the final terrible detail. "You will not take the Ark from the field yourself. That would mark you. You will entrust it to a small cadre of initiates, and once the maneuver is complete, you will return to the battle line and fight until you can fight no more. You must be seen to be loyal to the Pope's cause, even unto death. Your capture or your demise will be the greatest camouflage for the Ark's escape." The revelation was stunning, shocking, a confirmation of Kaelan's death sentence. He was not just leading his men into a last stand. He was leading them into a feigned massacre to cover a secret extraction. His fate was sealed, written in the scrolls of the shadowy order. His capture was intended. His eventual execution by the Sultan was expected. This was the true price of the secret crown. 20 years later, standing on the heights overlooking the Danube near Nicopolis, that memory burned in Kaelan's mind like a searing brand. He was no longer the naive sergeant. He was the master, bound by an oath that superseded the loyalty of kings and the call of the church. The trumpets of the French sounded again, closer now, fueled by the hubris he had just witnessed in Vidin. The charge would happen soon, and when the charge failed, the secret war would begin in earnest, paid for by the blood of the 7,000. He adjusted his helm, the black cross cold against his chest. The price is paid, he thought grimly, and the ledger is about to be filled. The Crusades' approach to Nicopolis was less a strategic march and more a surge of uncontrolled confidence. As they drew closer to the fortress city on the Danube, still stubbornly holding out under a small Ottoman garrison, the internal discipline of the massive Christian force disintegrated completely. The French nobility, keen to prove their superiority, insisted on taking the vanguard, relegating the more cautious Hungarians and the grimly disciplined Templars to supporting roles. Kaelan kept his Ordo Vindex contingent tight, a disciplined wedge of 7,000 men, knights, sergeants, and heavily armed infantry, moving like a black wave through the chaotic, colorful throngs of Western Europe's finest. Their silence was a stark contrast to the continuous, loud boasts of the French. "Look at them," Brother Rhys muttered, riding beside Kaelan. "They act as if the battlefield is a tournament ground, Master. Their wagons are filled with silks and wine, not spare arrows and surgical supplies. They have come to claim glory, Rhys, not to wage war, Kaelan replied, his eyes scanning the ridges ahead. The landscape around Nicopolis was deceptively rolling, offering perfect cover for mobile forces. Their lack of discipline will be the canyon where their charge dies. They reached Nicopolis late in the afternoon. The siege was ongoing, but the Crusader enthusiasm was high. The French lords immediately insisted on an assault, dismissing the Hungarian king Sigismund's plea to wait for better reconnaissance and to coordinate a joint measured attack. The target was the city's northern wall, which, while partially damaged, was still formidable. "The knights will scale the walls for honor," shouted Admiral John de Vienne, one of the few French leaders with genuine experience, though fatally bound by the chivalric code. "The faster we take the city, the faster we can face the Sultan." The assault began at dusk, fueled by a dangerous mix of zeal and impatience. It was a disaster. The scaling ladders were too few, the coordination non-existent, and the Ottoman defenders, though few, fought with the grim determination of men protecting their last refuge. The Templars, weighed down by heavy plate armor and fueled by a desire for individual glory, became easy targets on the exposed battlements. Hundreds fell from the walls, crushed beneath their own armor or pierced by arrows. It was during the chaotic retreat from the walls that Kaelan's Vindex contingent was finally called upon, not to attack, but to save the blundering Crusaders from a counterattack. As the French scrambled back, disorganized and disheartened, the small Ottoman garrison launched a swift, vicious sally from the main gate, attempting to seize the Crusader siege engines and throw the whole camp into panic. Kaelan, "Form the iron box. We will secure the northern breach," Kaelan barked, pulling his sword, the cold steel singing in the night air. The Templars reacted with chilling efficiency. They did not charge in an uncontrollable wave, but executed a precise, brutal maneuver they called the iron box. The Templar heavy infantry formed a tight four-sided shield wall, locking their massive kite shields and driving their pikes forward. The knights, meanwhile, dismounted and took position at the corners, acting as anchors. This sudden wall of disciplined steel smashed into the Ottoman sally force. The Templar training, honed for decades of small, desperate engagements, was now put to the ultimate test. They fought shoulder to shoulder, moving as a single, coordinated block. Every thrust was calculated, every shield bash deliberate. Where the French had been a glittering, chaotic rush, the Templars were a cold, unstoppable grinder. The Ottoman sortie was quickly and ruthlessly broken. Kaelan, fighting with the grim, economical precision of a master duelist, dispatched 3 Anatolian heavy infantrymen who dared to breach the pike line. He noticed a single, highly skilled Ottoman commander attempting to rally his shattered men. Kaelan drove his horse towards him, the massive beast crashing through the remaining Ottoman ranks. The Ottoman commander, a fierce-looking man with a curved scimitar, met Kaelan's charge with a curved scimitar. The blades met with a deafening clang. Kaelan's sword was heavier, designed for blunt force, and he drove the commander back with brutal strength. Before Kaelan could deliver the finishing blow, the Ottoman wisely disengaged, melting back into the darkness towards the fortress gate, having seen the impossible discipline of the Templars. Within an hour, the breach was cleared, the siege engines secured, and the shattered remnants of the French assault force were streaming back to their tents. Humbled but alive, saved by the Templars' cold efficiency, Kaelan rode back to the temporary command post. Sigismund, the King of Hungary, met him, his face a mixture of relief and despair. "You have saved the northern flank, Sir Kaelan, and perhaps my entire army," Sigismund said, his voice heavy. "But look what it cost us. The French lost hundreds of men and gained nothing but shame, and they will blame you for their failure, for showing them up." "Their pride is incurable, Your Majesty," Kaelan replied, sheathing his sword. "But the Sultan knows now that the Christian army is not just one mass of uncontrolled vanity. He knows the Templars are here, and that we fight differently. That single, disciplined maneuver has isolated us further. Kaelan knew the consequences instantly. The French would resent the Templars for their success, seeing their discipline as an insult to their valor, and the Sultan, whose scouts would have reported the Templars' unique fighting style, would now specifically plan his trap around the necessity of breaking that one immovable block of iron. As dawn broke, painting the Danube a pale gold, the news arrived. Bayezid's main army was less than a day's march away. The siege of Nicopolis was now moot. The true battle was about to begin on the open field. The French, stung by Knight's humiliation, would be doubly eager to prove their courage. Kaelan felt the rope tightening around the necks of his 7,000 men. They had secured the flank, but they had merely delayed the inevitable confrontation. The stage was set for the final, catastrophic act of European chivalry. Sultan Bayezid I, the Thunderbolt, Yildirim, sat in the cool shade of his command tent, a massive, richly embroidered pavilion that dwarfed the temporary structures of his generals. His expression was one of controlled, intense focus. He was a man built for speed and decision, famous for his forced marches and his ability to strike before an enemy realized the danger. He wore simple, functional armor, contrasting sharply with the silks and jewels of the Byzantine emissaries he kept as trophies. The intelligence reports from the skirmish at Nicopolis were grimly amusing. The French, they confirmed, were exactly as history and rumor had described, reckless, undisciplined, and intoxicated by their own mythology. But there was an anomaly: the Black Cross unit, the contingent of knights who moved and fought as a terrifyingly cohesive, silent bloc. "The reports are confirmed, Pasha," the Sultan addressed his Grand Vizier, a man named Ali. "The Frankish vanguard is a chaotic flood, but this smaller force, these Parshilach, the ones with the black and red banner, they fight with the discipline of my own Janissaries. They are veterans of the East. They must be the remnants of the Templars, my lord," Ali confirmed, unrolling a complex, detailed map of the Nicopolis battlefield. "They have been lurking in Cyprus and Rhodes for decades. If they are truly here, they will anchor the Christian line. They cannot be ignored." Bayezid's eyes narrowed, fixed on the map. He saw the French position, too far forward, too eager to seek glory on the plain. He saw the Hungarian line, cautious, but trapped between the arrogance of their allies and the threat of the river. And he saw the small, disciplined dot representing the Templars on the flank. "They fight differently, so we must bait them differently," the Sultan decided. "Ali, send a messenger to the Serbian prince Stefan. His cavalry are crucial. They must be held in reserve, fresh and hidden behind the ridge until the moment of the collapse. We will allow the French their charge, and we will allow the Templars their disciplined defense. But first, we must confirm the enemy's intent." The Sultan conceived a brilliant, subtle piece of psychological warfare designed to feed the French nobility's fatal flaw, pride. He ordered the release of a captured Christian spy, a low-ranking Wallachian mercenary who had been in custody for less than a day. The spy, terrified and unaware he was being manipulated, was given a quick, staged tour of a specially prepared section of the camp. This section was made to look chaotic and poorly defended. Old, scarred tents were erected haphazardly. The visible Sipahi units were mostly elderly or clearly suffering from dysentery, men intentionally chosen for their appearance of weakness and exhaustion. They were given loose, exaggerated orders to prepare for a hasty retreat. The mercenary was allowed to escape with his hands unbound and a path cleared for his frantic flight back to the Crusader lines. "The fool will report exactly what the French want to hear," Bayezid murmured to Ali. "He will tell them the Ottoman army is exhausted from forced marches, that the Sipahi are weak, and that a single glorious charge will shatter our entire vanguard, allowing them to ride straight to victory. Ali smiled, a rare expression on his austere face. It will confirm their arrogance, my lord. They crave glory, and you are offering them the illusion of an easy, spectacular victory. The French will rush forward expecting an easy kill, the Sultan continued, tracing the line where the charge would die. The Sipahi will yield ground, drawing them past the first line of defense, the hidden trenches, and the sharpened stakes. Once their charge is broken and their horses are pinned, the Akinji, my light cavalry, will swarm them like wasps. The French will be too heavy to retreat, too disorganized to fight effectively on foot. The Sultan then turned his attention to the Templar position. These Karshilach will be forced to follow the French momentum to prevent the entire line from collapsing instantly. Their discipline will save them from immediate annihilation, but it will commit them to the field, far from Sigismund's main force. That is where we use the Janissaries. The Sultan's plan was clear. The French would be the hammer that struck the nail of the Ottoman defense, but the Templars would be the specific target he needed to neutralize. He didn't want to simply defeat the Crusader army. He wanted to surgically remove the most dangerous professional element from the field. The spy, haggard and breathless, stumbled into the Crusader camp 2 hours later, bearing his vital intelligence. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Marshal Boucicaut, Nevers, and the other French lords seized upon the news as confirmation of their own genius. The Turks are exhausted. Bayezid is cornered. This is God's gift to the chivalry of France, John of Nevers shouted, his face alight with anticipated glory. Kaelan, standing apart with brother Rhys, watched the jubilant chaos with cold dread. He saw the spy, his wide, frightened eyes, his theatrical gasps for air, and instantly recognized the act of a man whose fear was genuine, but whose information was poison. "It's a lie, Rhys," Kaelan stated flatly. "A perfectly calculated lie. No spy who genuinely escaped a sultan's camp would have survived to report such convenient news. This is bait. Bayezid is giving them what they want to believe, and they will swallow it whole," Rhys confirmed, his hand resting instinctively on his sword hilt. "They will be riding to a feast, and they will be the main course." Kaelan turned to his men. The air was charged with anticipation, but the Templar ranks remained unnervingly still. He gave his final, grim order, cementing his commitment to the true oath over the misguided loyalty to the Crusade. "Prepare the Black Cross formation. Double the protection detail around the supply wagons where the Ark is held. We will ride out at dawn, but our mission is not the Sultan's line. Our mission is to survive the collapse and secure the evacuation route. The French will charge alone. We will wait for the wreckage." The morning mist lay heavy and cold over the plains of Nicopolis. As the sun began to burn through the fog, the massive Crusader army stirred. The French knights, their armor gleaming and their banners flying high, azure, or, and argent, were an awe-inspiring sight. The very picture of medieval chivalry. They were over 8,000 strong, the finest heavy cavalry in the world, positioned at the spearhead of the entire force. Sir Kaelan de Versailles watched from his position on the left flank, his 7,000 Templars silent and grim behind their black and red standards. He saw the French Marshal Boucicaut and the young, foolishly eager John of Nevers, dressed in magnificent gilded armor, riding to the front. They were heedless of the terrain, heedless of their allies, heedless of the obvious trap. King Sigismund of Hungary, who was to anchor the center, pleaded one last time for caution, urging the French to wait for the Hungarians to test the Ottoman lines with light infantry first. "Let them break their first defense, I beg you," Sigismund insisted. Nevers, however, was deaf to the counsel. "No, I have been granted the vanguard, and I will not yield the honor of the first blow to a mere infantryman." "The glory of God goes with the Knights of France." With a thunderous cry of "Montjoy Saint-Denis," the charge began. It was a spectacular, breathtaking sight. The French heavy cavalry, a solid wall of iron and muscle, thundered across the plain. The ground trembled beneath the weight of thousands of destriers, their hoofbeats drowning out the last faint appeals of caution. The Ottoman vanguard, the Sipahi, were exactly where Bayezid wanted them. They held their ground until the last possible moment. Then, with a well-practiced, disciplined movement that looked like panic to the rushing French, they began to yield and scatter, drawing the knights deeper into the field. The French, believing their intelligence was confirmed and the enemy was routing, intensified their pace, screaming in triumph. They rode straight past the retreating Sipahi, eyes fixed on the distant promise of the Sultan's command tent. "Now, Rhys, we follow," Kaelan commanded, his voice muffled by his helm. The Templar contingent did not charge in the same reckless frenzy. They moved at a fast, controlled trot, maintaining their formation. Kaelan had ordered his knights and sergeants to keep a 2-yard distance between each rank, knowing that space was vital for maneuvering. They were riding into the trap, but they were doing so with their eyes open. They watched as the leading French ranks, nearing the crest of a shallow, grass-covered rise, suddenly began to pitch and tumble forward in a sickening display of mass dismounting. The ground beneath the grass held the first deadly surprise: hidden palisades and deep camouflaged trenches. The French charge shattered instantly. Horses, moving at full gallop, snapped their legs on the sharp stakes or plunged headfirst into the pits. The dense ranks of the French cavalry compounded the disaster. Those behind slammed into the fallen, creating a horrific pileup of screaming men and flailing horses, all encased in heavy, immobilizing plate armor. The moment the charge broke, the true Ottoman light forces emerged from the ridges, the Akinji light cavalry and thousands of archers who had been hidden perfectly out of sight. They poured arrows into the disorganized, trapped French knights, who were now struggling desperately to rise from the mud and the corpses, too heavy to fight on foot and too exposed to mount a defense. Kaelan pulled his Templars to a sudden halt, just short of the trenches. The screams of the dying French knights were deafening, a horrifying symphony of failure. "Form the wedge! Dismount the sergeants and pikemen! We must secure a path through the carnage, or we will be surrounded," Kaelan roared over the din. The Templars executed their maneuver with machine-like precision. The knights dismounted, forming a living wall to shield the horse lines. The 7,000 men condensed into a disciplined rectangular formation, their purpose shifting instantly from advance to immediate brutal survival. As they began their slow, grueling advance through the wreckage of the French charge, the Ottoman archers turned their attention to the disciplined Templar line. Arrows began to rain down, impacting shields and helms with the sound of hailstones. "Keep the center tight! Close ranks!" Rhys shouted, moving along the pike line, his massive shield deflecting dozens of incoming missiles. The Templars were forced to fight through the mud, over the bodies of their supposed allies, all while repelling continuous, swarming attacks from the Akinji, who were now darting in and out, slashing at exposed legs and horse flanks, knowing the heavy Western armor made them virtually invulnerable to anything less than a clean pike thrust. Kaelan looked across the ruined field. The French were being systematically slaughtered. John of Navarre and Boucicaut, realizing their catastrophic error, were attempting to rally the few hundred men still mounted, but their commands were lost in the chaos. The French army, the supposed pinnacle of the crusade, was already dissolving. The Templars fought forward with terrifying, cold determination, carving a brutal path toward the Hungarian center, which was still holding its initial position. The French folly had committed the entire army, and Kaelan's sole focus was now forcing a link-up with Sigismund before the next, final layer of the Ottoman trap was sprung. he finally broke free of the dense crush of bodies, leading the surviving ranks of his heavy cavalry into a countercharge against a mass of Akinji attempting to flank him. The impact was decisive. The Templars' controlled heavy weight smashed through the lighter Ottoman horse, forcing them to scatter. As Kaelan paused, gathering his breath amidst the reek of blood and spent fear, he looked toward the ridgeline. He saw the shift. The scattered Ottoman forces were pulling back, revealing two enormous, terrifyingly perfect blocks of disciplined infantry who had been waiting patiently, entirely fresh, behind the Sipahi line. The sun caught the gleam of their curved swords and the purposeful stride of their advance. They were dressed in distinctive white and blue, marching in unnervingly perfect silence toward the shattered French front. The Janissaries had arrived. The cleanup crew had stepped onto the stage. The 7,000 Templars, now fighting alone amidst the wreckage of their allies, were about to become the Sultan's next and most determined target. The field of Nicopolis had become a slaughterhouse. Where the French had charged hours before, there was now a sprawling, hideous landscape of tangled bodies, shattered wood, and abandoned pennons. The cheers of the Crusaders had been replaced by the rhythmic, unnerving drums of the advancing Ottoman Empire. Sir Kaelan's Templars, having fought their way through the broken French vanguard, had finally established a tenuous link with the Hungarians under King Sigismund, but the success was fleeting. The entire left flank of the Christian army was exposed, and the pressure from the Ottoman forces was immense. The Janissaries, roughly 5,000 strong, marched forward with terrifying mechanical precision. They ignored the scattered, disorganized bands of surviving French knights who tried in vain to reform. Their focus was absolute. The disciplined, dangerous wedge of the Ordo Vindex. "They are coming, master," Rhys reported, his armor dented and streaked with blood. "They move like no other infantry I've ever seen. They have no concern for their own survival, only for the task." Indeed, the Janissaries, the elite slave soldiers of the Sultan, were a revolutionary fighting force. They advanced in dense, perfectly controlled columns, their composite bows firing in coordinated volleys, followed by men armed with curved scimitars and hatchets designed for close-quarters butchery. Kaelan watched them approach, the cold logic of the battlefield overriding his fear. This was the moment foretold in Vidin. The French charge had served its purpose, to exhaust itself upon the Sultan's prepared lines and to draw the entire battle away from the city walls. "Sigismund," Kaelan called, riding to the Hungarian king, who was frantically attempting to rally his own fatigued troops. "The French are broken beyond repair. They served as a sacrificial vanguard. The true fight is here, now. The Janissaries are aiming for your center to sever you from the Danube and cut off any retreat." Sigismund, a capable but outmaneuvered commander, gripped his sword. "I see it, Templar. Our retreat is already compromised. If they break us here, Bayezid will take us all captive. Then we must break their assault, not to win the battle, but to guarantee your escape. The Templars will pivot. We will commit our entire force, all 7,000 men, to holding this line. We will be the anvil against which the Janissary hammer strikes. Use that time, your majesty. You must take your remaining forces and follow the river south, now, before the Serbian heavy cavalry arrives to seal the pocket." This was the midpoint reversal. The goal was no longer the glory of the crusade or the taking of Nicopolis. It had shifted entirely to the desperate, sacrificial act of protecting the final retreat and ensuring the secret extraction of the Ark of St. George. Kaelan pulled his Templar contingent into a wide, heavily armored crescent formation, anchoring their flanks against a small, dense copse of trees and a steep drop-off to the riverbank. This reduced the surface area the Janissaries could attack and allowed them to utilize their disciplined pike and shield tactics to the maximum. The fighting that erupted was visceral and immediate. It was steel against steel, faith against faith, discipline against discipline. The Janissaries did not falter. They crashed into the Templar lines like a battering ram. The roar of the impact was immense, punctuated by the sharp, sickening sounds of breaking bones and splintering wood. The air grew thick with dust, sweat, and blood. The Templars held. Their training was impeccable. The pikemen thrust in unison, forcing the Janissaries back, only for the next rank of Ottoman soldiers to step over their fallen comrades and fill the gap. Kaelan fought on the front line, his massive sword serving as a cold, efficient instrument of death. He was less a warrior now and more an immovable obstacle, focusing only on the 2 feet of ground before him. Rhys, fighting beside him, was a whirlwind of defensive fury, his shield absorbing the continuous blows of the Janissary axes. "They are probing for weaknesses, master," Rhys yelled through the din. "Their attacks are focused on our seams." Kaelan knew the Janissary strategy: relentless pressure until the shield wall wavered, followed by a concentrated push to split the formation. If the Templars were split, they would be surrounded and consumed instantly. As the fighting reached its absolute peak, the air vibrating with exertion and fear, King Sigismund, seeing the horrifying commitment of the Templars, gave the order. The Hungarian center, battered but still cohesive, began its desperate, controlled retreat toward the river, aiming for the few waiting barges. Kaelan watched them go, a grim satisfaction mixing with the absolute terror of his position. The Ark of St. George, hidden in the baggage train, was now moving toward the riverbank, guarded by the handful of sworn Templar initiates who knew its true value. The primary oath was being fulfilled. Now, the final terrible act of the 7,000 Templars could begin. They were no longer an army trying to save the crusade. They were a sacrificial shield, dedicated entirely to buying minutes. Bayezid, watching from the ridge, saw the Hungarian retreat and the terrifying resolve of the Templar line. He was impressed, but furious. They were defying the natural order of battle. "The Black Cross must fall," Bayezid commanded, his voice sharp with impatience. "Send the reserves. Cut them off. That knot of iron cannot be allowed to survive. I want that Templar commander brought before me, alive." Kaelan heard the renewed cries from the Ottoman ranks as fresh troops, including the heavy Anatolian cavalry, were committed to the attack. The pressure on the Templar iron box multiplied tenfold. The crescent was beginning to buckle under the sheer weight of the Sultan's relentless commitment. The battlefield was now truly a sea of blood, and Kaelan knew he had reached the point of no return. His men were dying, but the Ark was escaping. He raised his sword, issuing a chilling command that would echo in the history of the Order. "Sergeants, turn your backs to the river. We fight now only toward the enemy. Let them understand the price of our obedience." The remnants of the French nobility were gone, either captured, fleeing, or dead. King Sigismund and the Hungarian forces were making their desperate withdrawal along the Danube, harassed but mostly unimpeded, thanks to the suicidal stand of the Templars. The field now belonged entirely to Bayezid I, and standing defiant in the middle of his victory was the isolated, battered, yet unbreakable square of the Ordo Vindex. Kaelan looked around at the faces of his men. The 7,000 had been whittled down to fewer than 1,500. They were exhausted, their breathing ragged, their armor chipped and bloodied, but their formation, the legendary iron box, held firm. They had turned their backs on the river, their escape route, committing entirely to holding the ground they stood on. The Janissaries, having initially expected to break a disorganized, demoralized force, were now shocked and enraged by the Templars' sheer, cold resolve. They regrouped, pulling back briefly to allow their archers to unleash a terrifying, concentrated firestorm designed to weaken the Templar shield wall. "Master, they are not fighting for territory now," Rhys gasped, his voice raw from shouting commands. They are fighting to break our discipline. Bayezid must be furious. Good, Kaelan grunted, adjusting his shield. Let his fury be the price of the Ark's escape. We have fulfilled the first part of the oath, now for the second. He signaled 3 select surgeons, men who had been secretly inducted into the highest level of the Ordo Vindex. They knelt quickly beside Kaelan. The Ark is moving now, following Sigismund's path. You have seen the signal, Kaelan whispered, his words barely audible over the hiss of arrows and the battle drums. Your duty is complete. You must break rank, disguise yourselves as fleeing Hungarians, and ensure the relic reaches the safety of the barges. You are the living record. Go, and do not look back. The surgeons exchanged a brief, solemn nod, their eyes full of a mixture of fear and absolute commitment. They arose, melted into the chaotic movement on the perimeter, and began their final secret mission. Kaelan watched them go, a single moment of emotional release washing over him. The oath was truly kept. With the Ark secured, Kaelan turned his full attention to the inevitable conclusion. He had to draw the remaining reserves of the Ottoman army onto his position, ensuring that the Sultan was too preoccupied with this impassable knot of defiance to pursue the retreating Hungarians and the precious relic. He saw the shift in the Ottoman lines. Bayezid was now deploying his final, most powerful reserve, the heavy Serbian vassal cavalry, led by Stefan Lazarevic, a brilliant commander forced into servitude. This force was composed of massive Balkan horses and heavily armored knights trained in the Western style of shock charge. "The Serbians!" Kaelan yelled, pointing toward the charging enemy. "They are heavy, Rhys. They will not break upon the palisades. They will hit us head on." This was the final tactical masterstroke by Bayezid, using Christian against Christian, armor against armor, to crack the Templar box. Kaelan knew they could not withstand a full-speed heavy cavalry charge in their current depleted state. He ordered a desperate counter-tactic. He pulled the remaining Templar heavy cavalry, less than 200 mounted knights, from the heart of the iron box, and prepared for a sacrificial, short-range charge. "Rhys, you will command the box. Hold the line against the Janissaries," Kaelan commanded. "We will break the momentum of the Serbians. I will hit their flank and drive them into the Janissary lines. Force friendly fire. It is the only way to slow the collapse." "Master, you cannot ride out. You are the anchor. If you fall, the box fails instantly," Rhys protested, fear etched on his face. "The box will fail anyway, Rhys. It is time to pay the full price of the oath." Kaelan threw off his heavy kite shield, taking up his greatsword with both hands. "The Ark is safe. Now we give them a legend to remember us by. Ride with me, brothers, for the Black Cross. Ride to shatter the line." With a final terrible cry that echoed the long-forgotten battle chants of the First Crusade, Kaelan and his 200 remaining mounted knights burst out of the side of the iron box formation. They charged directly into the flank of the thundering Serbian cavalry, a small, desperate hammer striking a colossal anvil. The collision was catastrophic. Kaelan aimed his charge not at the enemy commander, but at the dense central mass of the Serbian formation, attempting to throw their momentum sideways. The impact was brutal, horses and men instantly collapsing into a pile of mangled metal and flesh. Kaelan fought like a maddened man, his two-handed sword swinging in huge, devastating arcs, cutting through the Serbian ranks and driving them exactly where he wanted, into the careful lines of their own Ottoman allies. The unexpected, devastating attack threw the Serbian commander into confusion, and the Janissaries, caught between the Templar charge and the panicked heavy Serbians, suddenly faced a moment of internal chaos. But the maneuver came at a terrible cost. A Serbian war axe, thrown from a dismounted knight, spun through the air, finding the vulnerable joint of Brother Rhys's neck armor. Rhys staggered, the massive Welshman dropping his shield, clutching futilely at the wound as the life drained from his eyes. He collapsed instantly, the massive weight of the sergeant-at-arms falling onto the Templar pike line. Kaelan, seeing his most trusted brother fall, felt a wave of icy despair that transcended the fatigue of battle. He was alone. The iron box was now deprived of its anchor. The sacrifice was complete, but the battle was not over. He turned his horse, driving his small, shattered band of knights back towards the collapsing Templar box, ready for the final grand defense. The loss of brother Rhys, Kaelan's trusted sergeant-at-arms, ripped a hole through the remaining Templar formation. The iron box wavered for a fatal moment, the men stunned by the sudden, brutal death of their anchor. Kaelan, however, provided no time for grief. He drove his small, mangled detachment of mounted knights back into the thick of the fray, using their returning momentum to shore up the collapsing flank. "Close the gap! Keep the shield wall tight! For the oath!" Kaelan roared, dismounting instantly, casting aside his heavy, specialized lance in favor of his greatsword. The Serbian cavalry, temporarily disorganized by Kaelan's suicidal charge, quickly regrouped, but the momentary lapse of order was enough for the Templars to reform their shield wall, albeit smaller and more desperate. The 7,000 men were now fewer than 1,200, an island of discipline drowning in a sea of Ottoman rage. This was the climax. It was not a grand strategic push, but a relentless, minute-by-minute survival against overwhelming odds. The Templars, realizing the game was over, shed all fear. They fought now for a single, terrifying purpose: to die as an obstacle. Kaelan stood at the very front of the formation, his black and red surcoat torn, his face smeared with grime and sweat, his movements fueled only by sheer will. He became the living manifestation of the Ordo Vindex oath, a sentinel against the relentless advance of the Sultan's elite. Sultan Bayezid, observing the scene from the ridge, was genuinely astonished. No European force had ever withstood the combined assault of the Janissaries and the Serbian heavy cavalry for this long. He watched as the small, concentrated knot of knights repelled thrust after thrust, their discipline answering the Janissaries' training with an unnatural, almost spiritual fervor. "They are demons," the Sultan declared, his voice tight with impatience. "They must be broken. Commit the reserve archers to fire directly into the center of the formation. Do not aim for the shield wall. Fire high. They must break." The Templar formation was suddenly hammered by a rain of arrows falling from above. Horses screamed. Men inside the relative safety of the box began to fall, and the cohesion of the center was threatened. Seeing the heart of his formation weakening, Kaelan did the only thing left. He initiated the legendary final defense of the order, a battle chant that had been forbidden and hidden for over a century, known only to the sworn members of the Ordo Vindex. He raised his bloodied sword to the sky, and in a voice that somehow cut through the din of the battlefield, he began the chant. It was not a loud, boisterous war cry, but a haunting, rhythmic Latin liturgy. Non nobis Domine, non nobis, not unto us, O Lord, not unto us. The remaining Templars, recognizing the ancient sacred call, took up the chant instantly. The liturgical cadence replaced the screams and the curses. It was a cold, powerful assertion of divine purpose over temporal fate. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The Janissaries, who fought with a methodical, secular discipline, were momentarily unnerved by the sudden, hypnotic, religious fervor of their enemy. Their attack faltered. The Templars pressed the advantage. Fueled by this sudden surge of shared final purpose, the shield wall surged outward slightly, driving the Janissaries back with renewed ferocity. Kaelan felt the strength flow back into his limbs. They were not fighting to live. They were fighting to complete the liturgical sacrifice. Kaelan looked toward the place where Rhys had fallen. The loss was profound, but Rhys's body now lay concealed under the pile of the shield wall, protected by the very men he had commanded. The memory served to steel Kaelan's resolve. The Ark was gone. Their duty was now solely to the dramatic conclusion of the series. The Ottoman commanders, furious at the unexpected religious defiance, ordered a full-scale simultaneous assault from all sides. The Janissaries pressed in, supported by the revived Serbian cavalry, attempting to crush the small Templar box into the earth. This final assault was a grinding, intimate horror. There was no space for swords to swing. The fighting became a matter of knives, axes, and daggers thrusting through the gaps in the armor. Men fought hand to hand, locked together in desperate, fatal embraces. Kaelan, fighting with his back to his own remaining men, repeatedly repelled the Janissaries trying to climb over the shield wall. He knew this moment. The absolute total commitment of the enemy's resources to his position was the final glorious camouflage for the escaping Ark. Every Muslim soldier focused on this small, defiant knot was a soldier not pursuing the Hungarian king and the hidden relic. As the press of bodies became overwhelming, Kaelan felt a stunning, sharp pain in his side. A Janissary had managed to thrust a narrow dagger through the seam of his plate armor. Kaelan roared, smashing the Ottoman's head with the pommel of his sword before driving his dagger into the man's throat. He pulled the enemy blade out of his own flesh, the hot, sticky pain momentarily staggering him. He looked up. The sky was darkening with smoke and the sheer volume of arrows. His knights were falling one by one, their voices strained. The iron box was shrinking rapidly, contracting upon itself, but it was not yet broken. This was the end, the final terrible payment for the Ordo Vindex oath. Kaelan raised his voice one last time, leading his remaining brothers in the chant, preparing to meet the final wave of the Janissary embrace. The iron box was now less than a square of 200 men, the Templar formation shrinking like ice in fire. The bodies of the fallen, both Ottoman and Crusader, piled around them, creating a gruesome rampart that momentarily stalled the Janissary advance, but also trapped the surviving Templars in their own fortress of death. Kaelan's breath came in ragged gasps. The dagger wound in his side burned, and the massive exertion of wielding his greatsword was draining his remaining strength. He was surrounded by the few knights and sergeants who still held the line, their faces masks of blood and exhaustion. Sultan Bayezid, now entirely focused on crushing this defiant fragment, ordered his commanders to ignore all other targets. The Janissaries, having witnessed the failure of their frontal assaults, adopted a new tactic. They began hurling heavy spiked maces and axes over the shield wall, attempting to break the formation from within. The internal chaos was too much. A final, desperate volley of spiked maces fell into the Templar center, crushing the legs of the standard-bearer. The black and red banner, the symbol of the Ordo Vindex, fell to the ground, instantly seized by a charging Janissary commander. "The banner is down!" Kaelan roared, the sight a renewed searing injection of purpose. "They have the banner! Attack! We cannot let them claim the oath!" This was the final spontaneous charge, a sudden collective suicidal break from the defensive posture. Kaelan knew the end was seconds away. The only remaining goal was to ensure the last moments were spent violently, dramatically, and with undeniable purpose. He led the charge himself, bursting from the shrinking iron box with 50 of his last remaining knights, aiming directly for the Janissary commander who held the fallen standard. The Templars crashed into the denser Ottoman lines one final time. It was a terrifying close-quarters melee, a furious storm of hacking and stabbing. Kaelan fought with the terrifying strength of a cornered beast, driven by the need to retrieve the fallen symbol of his order. He reached the Janissary commander, a massive Turk wearing a distinctive helmet adorned with silver horns. Their swords met. Kaelan's greatsword was designed for momentum and brute force, the Janissary's scimitar for speed and slicing. Kaelan parried, driving the Turk back, and with a final massive overhead sweep, he shattered the man's helm and felled him. He snatched the black and red banner from the dead man's grasp, but the victory was meaningless. He looked back. The remaining Templar box had been instantly overwhelmed by the Janissaries who flooded the breach. The chant was gone. replaced only by the desperate choking sounds of men being butchered. The Ordo Vindex was unmade. Kaelan, standing alone amidst a pile of fresh Ottoman dead, the recovered banner clutched in his hand, found himself surrounded. He was wounded, exhausted, and bleeding, his armor dented beyond recognition. He lifted his sword for one last defiant stand, but dozens of pikes and swords were instantly leveled at him. A massive Ottoman his face grim and respectful, stepped forward, holding a massive shield. "Stand down, Karshilach. The Sultan commands you be taken alive. You have fought well. Do not shame yourself with a useless final death." Kaelan stared at the the weight of the recovered banner in his hand, a profound irony. The symbol was safe, but the order was gone. He looked across the field, seeing the faint, retreating line of the Hungarian barges disappearing down the Danube. The Ark was safe. The oath was kept. With a profound, final weariness that felt heavier than his plate armor, Kaelan dropped his greatsword. It fell into the bloody mud with a heavy, final clang, marking the end of the legendary Templar defiance. He allowed the Ottoman soldiers to disarm him, the sudden release of fighting tension nearly collapsing his legs. The battle was over. The Crusaders had been utterly annihilated. Kaelan, the lone defiant commander of the Ordo Vindex, was taken captive. A short while later, Kaelan was dragged, shackled, across the field to the Sultan's command post on the ridge. The stench of blood and burning oil was overwhelming. The Sultan, Bayezid I, sat upon a simple raised command stool, his expression severe but thoughtful. Behind him stood Prince Stefan Lazarevich, the Serbian vassal, his armor chipped, his expression grim. Bayezid gestured to the bloody, tattered black and red banner that lay on the ground beside Kaelan. "You, Sir Knight of the Black Cross," Bayezid began, his voice surprisingly calm, almost scholarly. "You led 7,000 men into a feigned massacre. Your French allies were slaughtered by their own arrogance. Your Hungarians fled, yet your discipline was absolute. You were the only command that did not break." He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "I ask you, who are you? You are not French. Your tactics are those of the veterans of Acre and the true desert wars. Why did you fight so far from your allies? Why did you commit to a suicidal defense that allowed the bulk of the Hungarian king to escape? What specifically were you protecting?" Kaelan looked up at the Sultan. The exhaustion and pain, a dull ache beneath the surface of his resolve. He knew the terms of his final, secret duty. He must divert the Sultan's curiosity away from the Ark and onto a more plausible, secular motive. "We are the last of the Vindices," Kaelan admitted, using the Order's secret name. "We are the Templars who never died. We came to restore our honor and our name after the betrayal by the French king a century ago. We fought, Sultan, to prove that the discipline of the true Christian soldier is unbreakable, even when betrayed by our own allies." He pointed toward the captured, shame-faced French nobility being dragged into the camp. "We were buying time for the King of Hungary, yes, not for his safety, but to ensure that the wealth of the King of Hungary's treasury, the vast gold of the Hungarian crown, which we were sworn to guard, was not lost to the infidel. We died for a matter of gold and honor, Sultan, nothing more." Kaelan lied easily, committing his final, definitive act of deception. The gold of the Hungarian crown was a massive, plausible motive. It was a massive prize, worthy of a suicidal defense. The Ark of St. George, a spiritual and political bomb, would remain safely concealed in the stream of retreating refugees. Kaelan, the disgraced, ransomed prisoner, was a perfect, expendable decoy. The day after the catastrophic battle was marked by a suffocating silence, broken only by the distant, chilling cries of the wounded and the systematic efficiency of the Ottoman burial details. A heavy, Oily smoke drifted across the plain, rising from the pyres being built to dispose of the thousands of Christian dead. The stench of carnage hung everywhere. Sir Kaelan, bruised, wounded, and confined in heavy iron shackles, was held in a secure central prison tent within the Sultan's camp. He was given minimal care, just enough to keep him alive and capable of conversation, ensuring his future value as a high-status prisoner of war. He sat on the dirt floor, leaning against a tent pole, the sounds of the victorious army washing over him, the casual chatter of the guards, the clatter of arms, the braying of captured horses. His heart was a hollow space. 7,000 men gone. The noblest purpose of the Ordo Vindex achieved at the cost of its last great army. He ran a weary, bloodied hand over his short-cropped hair, the only remaining mark of his rank, a faint black cross stamped on the fabric of his torn undertunic. Late that afternoon, he was summoned. Guards led him through the vast, organized Ottoman camp, past rows of Janissaries cleaning their weapons with emotionless efficiency, and through the compound where the captured French nobility, including John of Nevers and Marshal Boucicaut, were held. The French lords, stripped of their finery and huddled in miserable groups, refused to meet Kaelan's eye. Their arrogance curdled into shame. Kaelan felt no triumph, only pity for their fatal, glorious blindness. He was brought again before Sultan Bayezid, who was now seated at a low, ornate table, studying a map of the Balkans. The map was already outdated, Kaelan realized, as the Sultan's finger traced a line toward the heart of Europe. "The King of Hungary is safe, Templar," Bayezid stated without looking up. He managed to escape down the river with nearly a third of his remaining men. A significant portion of his wealth, the gold you were so keen to protect, was also successfully evacuated. The Sultan finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "A skillful, desperate maneuver. You certainly bought your monarch time. But I find the price curious. 7,000 of the most disciplined fighters in the West sacrificed for mere coin. Your order's reputation precedes you. I had imagined a greater goal." "The goal was the preservation of our honor, Sultan," Kaelan replied, forcing the lie through dry lips. "The world believes us extinct, betrayed for greed. We showed the world and our own corrupted church that the Templars' oath to protect property is immutable, even unto death." Bayezid picked up a small dark object from the table. It was the iron cross that Kaelan had worn beneath his armor. "I have searched the remaining baggage of your Vindices. I found no sign of a great royal treasury, no massive chests of Hungarian gold. Only simple supplies, weapons, and this mere devotion." Kaelan felt a cold twist of panic. Had the Sultan's men found the Ark? The gold was shipped ahead, on smaller barges, long before the battle commenced, Kaelan insisted, his voice steady. "The king always feared betrayal. Our defense was for the rear guard and the remaining supply lines. The trinket is merely a devotion." Bayezid paused, weighing the cross in his hand. Kaelan knew he was balancing Kaelan's plausible explanation, gold, against the true impossible reason, the Ark. The Sultan was a practical man. Gold and honor were concepts he understood. Spiritual lineage and ancient Byzantine secrets were less tangible. "Perhaps," Bayezid murmured, tossing the cross back onto the table. "Your sacrifice was spectacular, Templar. You have won great honor among your enemies, even as your allies curse your name for abandoning the field." He then gestured to Prince Stefan Lazarevich, who stood nearby, his face still etched with the weariness of battle. "Tell him, Prince, tell him what will become of his captured allies." Stefan, the Serbian prince forced into vassalage by the Sultan, spoke with a low, troubled voice. "The French nobility, Nevers, Boucicaut, and the others, the Sultan intends to hold them for an immense ransom. They are worth more alive, for the gold their families will pay. And the rest?" Kaelan pressed, his stomach clenching. He knew the terrible fate of common prisoners. Stefan avoided his gaze. "The Sultan is making a statement, Templar. The common infantry, the common men, all those who did not wear noble arms, they are to be executed, thousands. Bayezid intends to show Europe the price of this crusade. Kaelan closed his eyes, a profound wave of grief and despair washing over him. The common soldiers, the men who had been led to slaughter by the hubris of their lords, were now paying the ultimate, final price. The price of Nicopolis was far greater than the Templars' 7,000. Bayezid watched Kaelan's despair with a grim satisfaction. This is the reward for the pride of the West, Templar. Your order, with its grim discipline, was the only force worthy of respect on that field. But your death was assured the moment you followed your foolish allies. The Sultan rose, turning back to his map. You, Templar, are worth alive. You will be ransomed. Perhaps you can return to the West and tell them what awaits them if they cross the Danube again. Tell them the Thunderbolt is coming. Kaelan remained silent, accepting his fate, imprisonment, ransom, and a return to the shadowy world of the Ordo Vindex, alone, without his army, but with the oath fulfilled. The silence descended again, heavier now, filled with the smoke of the pyres and the chilling certainty of the Sultan's next massive move. Weeks later, the shattered remnants of the Crusader camp were gone, swallowed by the advance of winter and the efficiency of the Ottoman forces. Kaelan was among the high-value prisoners marched south toward Anatolia, a long, grueling journey designed to break the spirits of the captured nobility. His physical wounds were healing, but the scars of Nicopolis were permanent. His final audience with Sultan Bayezid had secured his fate. A high ransom demanded from Venetian banking houses, the supposed guardians of the Hungarian crown gold he claimed to have protected. It was a perfect cover. He was simply a valuable piece of property, not the key to a strategic religious secret. The Ottoman army, however, was already turning its immense focus toward the next target, their victory at Nicopolis, a mere stepping stone. During a temporary stop near Adrianople, he was held in a secure stone vault. As the hours passed, he heard a scratching sound at a high, barred window. He looked up and saw a shadow that moved with unnatural stealth. A piece of parchment, weighted by a small stone, was dropped onto the floor. Kaelan quickly retrieved it, concealing it within his tunic. The note was brief, written in the complex cipher only the highest-ranking members of the Ordo Vindex understood. Ark received, lineage secure, your sacrifice noted, hold the lie. A profound, exhausted wave of relief washed over Kaelan. The mission was complete. The 7,000 lives had secured the greatest spiritual treasure of the order and prevented the Sultan from claiming a relic that could have granted him terrifying political and religious leverage. Their defeat on the field was a strategic victory for the secret war. The ransom was eventually paid, a massive sum, confirming the Templars' deep financial reach, reinforcing the lie that Kaelan had died to protect material wealth. Kaelan was released in late spring of 1397 onto the Venetian docks of Rhodes, headquarters of the Hospitallers. He was a broken figure, gaunt, scarred, and officially disgraced by the surviving French nobility, who blamed the Templars' cowardice for their capture. But the true members of the Ordo Vindex saw him as a living martyr. His first act was to be brought, blindfolded, to the hidden Cypriot chapter house, where the order now made its sanctuary. The ancient Grand Master, frailer still, waited for him. Standing beside the Ark of St. George, the small bound casket rested on a velvet cushion. "You fulfilled the oath, Sir Kaelan," the Master said, voice trembling. "You led an army of sacrifice and secured the lineage. The world believes you failed to save gold. We know you saved the church." Kaelan knelt, unable to speak. The emotional exhaustion was total. "The price, Grandmaster," he finally whispered. "The price of 7,000 souls. A terrible price, but necessary," the Master affirmed. "Nicopolis proved what we knew. The West is paralyzed by pride and greed. They cannot stop the Thunderbolt. Our order cannot fight this war in the open. Our purpose is deeper, preservation, preparation, and the long game. He placed his hand on the Ark. While Bayezid turns his attention east, distracted by the coming storm of the Mongols, we will begin the next phase. We will take the Ark farther west, into the deep shadows of Europe, where it can be protected from the coming Ottoman tide. And you, Sir Kaelan, will be the shadow that guards it. Kaelan, the disgraced commander, was elevated to the highest rank, master of the Ark's sanctuary. His new life would be spent in silence and secrecy, commanding a handful of initiates, living always on the run, knowing that the fate of the secret hinged entirely on his continued survival and discretion. Years later, in 1402, in the Turkish city of Bursa, Kaelan, operating in deep cover as a disgraced merchant spy, watched a massive, terrified crowd gathered in the main square. An emissary of the Ordo Vindex, a man who had not fought at Nicopolis but had dedicated his life to intelligence, met Kaelan in a shadowed tavern. "The Sultan, Kaelan," the spy whispered, eyes wide with fear and awe. "The Thunderbolt has been struck by a greater storm. Timur, the scourge of God, has met Bayezid at Ankara." The news was staggering. The massive Ottoman army, the one that had crushed the Crusaders at Nicopolis, had itself been utterly destroyed by the Mongols under Timur. Bayezid I, the invincible sultan, was captured and reportedly died in captivity. "Bayezid is gone," Kaelan breathed, the irony a heavy weight in his chest. The sultan who had doomed his army was himself now ruined. "Yes," the spy confirmed. "The Ottomans are now in civil war, leaderless and broken. The Western Christian world has been granted a reprieve, perhaps a century, not by the bravery of their knights, but by the violence of the Mongols." Kaelan rose, looking east, where the dust of Timur's conquest was settling. He had witnessed the peak of Ottoman power at Nicopolis, and now their sudden, shocking downfall. The sacrifice of the 7,000 had not been the end, but the crucial prelude to a terrifying new chapter. "The price was paid, not for gold, but for time," Kaelan said, a single tear tracing a clean path through the grime on his face. "We fought so the Ark could live. The gates of Constantinople are still standing. The Ordo Vindex has survived the fire. Now we prepare for the inevitable future." He picked up his travel bag, ready for the road. His purpose was sealed. He was the guardian of the last, most dangerous secret of Christendom, wandering the shadows of a world forever changed by the clash at Nicopolis. The sun was setting on the age of open crusades, but a new dawn of hidden war had begun.